Welcome to a new video and a new camera comparison, this time between the red against the gold, the iPhone SE 2020 against the Redmi Note 10 Pro. So let's get started. Let's check these out here, and you can see how big the camera bump of the Redmi Note 10 Pro is. 1/4 of the whole size of the iPhone SE 2020. And yeah, what we have on the iPhone SE is a 12 megapixel snapper only, and on the Redmi Note 10 Pro with a 108 megapixel snapper as the main camera. We have an 8 megapixel ultra wide angle, we have a 5 megapixel macro and 2 megapixel depth sensor. And of course we have also something on the front here, where we have a 7 megapixel snapper on the iPhone SE, and we have a 16 megapixel snapper on the Redmi Note 10 Pro. So let's start with some videos of those selfie cams. So this is now recording with the iPhone SE 2020, 7 megapixel sensor here, 1080p 30 frames per second, and probably you will get the same on the new iPhone SE 2022. But yeah, this is what you can expect in terms of colors. This is what you can expect in terms of recording via external microphone, and this is what you can expect in terms of HDR, if there's even any. I think the sun is not out, but you see maybe some clouds in the background here. And let's check out the Redmi Note 10 Pro. Now recording with the Xiaomi Redmi Note 10 Pro's front-facing camera, also 1080p 30 frames per second, the maximum this front-facing camera can do. And I think I see some clouds here in the background, so HDR might be a little bit better here on the Redmi Note 10 Pro. 16 megapixels versus 7 megapixels, but I think the sensor size is almost the same. Both don't have autofocus, so you don't have the luxurious autofocus that you have from some flagship phones. And yeah, stabilization I think should be fine here as well. And audio also recorded externally on the Redmi Note 10 Pro. Let's check out the main cameras. And now recording with the iPhone SE 2020 and Full HD 60 frames per second, so you get nice smooth frames. It can go up, I think, 4K 60 frames per second, even at least 4K 30 is possible. You have to go, I think, to high efficiency mode for 4K 60 frames per second. What you will notice immediately, because it only has one camera, it is cropping quite in, so you're quite close. It's not so comfortable to hold, and for vlogging setup it is possible. And it has good video, of course, like we knew already from, or I showed you already in my earlier comparisons, but it's a bit of a cramp to hold it so long here. And yeah, the quality, let's compare it with the Redmi Note 10 Pro. And now I'm recording with the Redmi Note 10 Pro's main sensor, 108 megapixels, Full HD 60 frames per second. It can go up to 4K 30, so the iPhone SE has a slight advantage with its 4K 60 capability. How is stabilization here? How are the colors? Dynamic range, I think you see already that this larger sensor on the Redmi Note 10 Pro also produces a nicer bokeh around me, even though you might see like a little bit of a black shadowing going on, which I think is from the depth sensor that is trying to read my person here and focus, and adds a little bit of more depth. And the contrast is a bit higher here on this camera. I don't like this too much, I have to say. It's sometimes overdoing it a little bit, but in this good bright situation, even though there's no sun out, it's a very good sensor, and it's working fine. Wider field of view as the iPhone, and you can go even wider if you want to with the ultra wide angle. And this is now the ultra wide angle on the Redmi Note 10 Pro, however only 1080p 30 frames per second. What you will notice though is better stability, first of all because it's an ultra wide angle, but also 1080p 60 frames per second I think is a little bit less stable than on the iPhone. On the Redmi Note 10 Pro, and 30 frames per second is the sweet spot of this camera. I'm not sure if it's a MIUI 13 update that I got for the Redmi Note 10 Pro. I have in mind that I think with the earlier MIUI 11 version this was not an issue. But you can write down in the comment section if you noticed any camera degradation with the update to MIUI 12. So this is the ultra wide angle, and we will take a look now at some photos and compare the Redmi Note 10 Pro against the iPhone SE. The iPhone SE 2020 always on the left and the Redmi Note 10 Pro always on the right. What you first can see on first glance is that you get a much brighter picture on the iPhone SE in this particular situation here, which is pretty interesting, that the Redmi Note 10 Pro was exposing more to the sky apparently and made the foreground, the green grass, a little bit darker. When you zoom in, what you will notice also is that in terms of details, the iPhone SE is lacking a little bit, especially in the grass area here, where the Redmi Note 10 Pro has a little bit more of detail. But this could be, first of all, pixel binning, both 12 megapixel roughly. The iPhone SE native 12 megapixel, the Redmi Note 10 Pro, it's pixel binning from 108 megapixel to 12 megapixels. We have much more punchier color on the Redmi Note 10 Pro. It's not only the darkness and brightness, but also the green has a bit more punch here. We have a bit more shadows, of course, because it's in a darker exposure, but also more contrast on the Redmi Note 10 Pro, as well as, I think, slightly heavier applied sharpening on the Redmi Note 10 Pro. And yeah, when you compare it to the iPhone SE 2020, I think the iPhone SE did manage to take a shot that is a little bit brighter and I think better, because everything is more equally exposed, where here you have like shadows for some reason that, yeah, shouldn't be there. But you have one good advantage of the Redmi Note 10 Pro. You can go to the ultra wide angle. This one is very consistent to the main one. Gets even a little bit darker here in this situation, and yeah, the detail level is not the best, but you have much wider field of view than the iPhone SE 2020 that already, in comparison to this one here, has a bit narrower field of view. As you can see, the Redmi Note 10 Pro has a bit of wider field of view on its main default camera, so you get a bit of cropped or zoomed in shot on the iPhone SE 2020 by default. So with the Redmi Note 10 Pro, if you want to capture the grand cathedral in Cologne, for example, or anything else, this might make more sense with the ultra wide angle. When we take a look at this puddle shot here, what we can see is, yeah, it's almost reversed. We have more punchy colors, more yellowish kind of color cast on the iPhone SE 2020. We have a bit more muted colors, a bit more cooled down colors on the Redmi Note 10 Pro, and a bit more brighter colors, less of kind of this yeah, more contrasty look that we have on the iPhone SE here. And you can see it here in the tree, for example, and compare it to this tree here. And even also the HDR rendering is a bit different, because we have a little bit of bluish going on here on the Redmi Note 10 Pro. And the grass, take a look at the green grass here, completely punchy, and here I think a bit different on the Redmi Note 10 Pro, and not so warm. Also here, the whole earth here that you can see, the dirt, and the puddle itself a bit more bluish, and here a bit warmed up, a bit more warm on the iPhone 2020. And you can see this throughout all the pictures, even the selfie pictures that I took here. And one of them didn't have the mirror option on, but anyway, what you can see here is that a warmer picture on the iPhone SE 2020. My skin color is much warmer, and on the Note 10 Pro it's more realistic to what my skin color would look like, a bit more cooled down. And when we zoom in, you can see that, yeah, here Selfie Cam, the details are a bit lacking. And if I compare this here to the Redmi Note 10 Pro, you can see the Redmi Note 10 Pro 16 megapixels is almost double the pixels that you get on the iPhone SE 2020. It's not so soft, it is a bit more sharp. It's not 100% sharp because it is a fixed focus camera, but you can see all my wrinkles here as well. So maybe the iPhone SE 2020 might be a little bit more pleasing to the eye because everything is a little bit soft and still looks good like this, but I think it's a bit too warm, it's a bit too yellowish here. And yeah, tell me what you think. Then the next one, a close-up shot. Again, we can see a bit more warm colors on the iPhone SE 2020. In terms of bokeh, the Redmi Note 10 Pro has a larger sensor, so you can see the bokeh is much smoother. than on the SE, because the SE has more defined still background blur, not so much bokeh, even if you get very close. But when it comes to detail level, I think again both on par, a bit more yellowish, a bit more contrasty on the iPhone SE 2020, which might lead you to think, there's more detail in this shot. But if you take a look closely, no, it's really not. There's a little less contrast on the Redmi Note 10 Pro, but that's basically it. And we stay at close-ups, and we have this close-up where you can see the difference in sensor size as well. The iPhone SE 2020 having a much smaller sensor, you can get a lot closer to a subject or object, and in this case you can see, yeah, it looks looks pretty awesome. And I can zoom in 100%. You can see all the little details here. But the Redmi Note 10 Pro is no slouch either. You can see, first of all, it was focusing more on the backgrounds here than in the foreground. So this is the larger sensor. You get a lot, not so much depth of field. So you have to play with it a little bit, or you can play it, which is good. You can see here, yeah, both getting unsharp here. But here we have, yeah, also the foreground a little bit and not in focus. But here it's more not in focus in the foreground, and the background more in focus. But the Redmi Note 10 Pro has an ace up its sleeve. It has the 5 megapixel tele macro cam, and this is really a usable macro cam, so I'm not sure why the Redmi Note 11 series doesn't have this macro cam, because this is way better than the 2 megapixel macro cams that you get. And yeah, look at this, it's good. It is not the colors, you see iPhone a bit warmer, the colors are a bit muted here on the Redmi Note 10 Pro tele macro, but you can see so much details here that it is really cool to have. And yeah, it's a good thing. So this gives you the flexibility. Here an interesting shot that shows you also the difficulties that I had struggling with the Redmi Note 10 Pro when it comes to smaller objects, close-ups. What I did is, because I couldn't get so close to this subject here, I used the zoom function on the Redmi Note 10 Pro to get roughly the same image as on the iPhone SE 2020, where I could still focus. By the way, the iPhone SE 2020 has a very awful indicator if you're really focused or not, so I had to take 3 or 4 shots until I get something that is roughly in focus. So you can see this is roughly in focus, here it's getting out of focus, so I hit basically the closest distance that I could get to this. And this here on the Redmi Note 10 Pro, I was a bit further away, but to get the same kind of feeling in shot, I zoomed in. 2 times zoom is possible here with a 1 click, and it's a crop into the main sensor. And when we compare it, you can see, of course, yeah, it's a bit of digital sharpened up. It is sharp. There's a nice bokeh. It's I think, yeah, even a bit nicer than the one on the iPhone, but you be the judge here. Of course, the iPhone doesn't zoom in, it's not the zoom shot, so, but it's very interesting how close they can get with this zoom shot on the Redmi Note 10 Pro to the real deal on the iPhone SE 2020. So pretty interesting here to see this also in this close-up shot. Otherwise, when we're talking about zoom, let's do a zoom shot montage here basically. This is 1 times on both. You can see again the Redmi Note 10 Pro is a lot wider here, wider field of view. When it comes to the sign itself that I want to zoom in, both pretty sharp. You can see warmer colors on the iPhone SE, again colder on the Redmi Note 10 Pro. And when we go into the maximum zoom of the iPhone SE, which is roughly I think 5 or 6 times here, and compare it to the maximum zoom of the Redmi Note 10 Pro, which is 10 times, you can see the 10 times zoom gets a bit closer and it's still readable. Of course, if I go to 100%, it's like, okay, everything pixelated, but here it is not much better, I have to say. So what I did, I went back on the Redmi Note 10 Pro to roughly 5 times to make it like comparable to the iPhone SE 2020, and I think I got it here. Again, color difference, a bit darker this time also around on the iPhone SE 2020, a bit brighter on the Redmi Note 10 Pro, and I think they are on par. When you go to 100%, maybe slightly more pixels on the iPhone SE 2020 and less pixelated on the Redmi Note 10 Pro. but this both cannot show the text underneath here, but maybe a little bit more readable on the Redmi Note 10 Pro than on the iPhone SE 2020. So when it comes to zoom shots, very similar, but the Redmi Note 10 Pro can go up to 10 times zoom, which as you can see here, this is a bit closer than this here. So yeah, do with this what you want to do. Let's check out the another close-up shot where you can clearly see the difference again. Very small object, like this little flower, the only flower that was blooming there right now, or halfly open at least, not really blooming. And you can see that the iPhone SE struggles really to hit the focus point if I get any closer, so I have to be very far away to get this like this. 100% it looks good. A bit more punchy. Why is it more punchy and not so muted as on the Redmi Note 10 Pro? Because I took the telemacro lens on the Redmi Note 10 Pro to take this photo, and it looks also very astonishing and very detailed. And keep in mind, this is only 5 megapixels and I'm not even zoomed in. If I zoom in now, you can see the difference, how much details you get still with this 5 megapixels. This is why I think this lens setup on the Redmi Note 10 Pro offers more flexibility in such shots. Does not always have the best photos, as you saw with the first photo shots, but the flexibility you definitely get with this one. And also HDR, I think. Let's take a look at this shot here. Again, warmer colors on the iPhone, we know this already, but also the clouds here, much more defined, a bit more bluish. And here everything is more red and yellowish kind of cast on the iPhone SE. And yeah, it's a bit more punchy colors. And if I zoom in here, you can see both are doing sharpening and applying this sharpening, but it's getting a bit softer here on the iPhone SE. Take a look at the bush in the background and compare it to the Redmi Note 10 Pro. I think the Redmi Note 10 Pro, because it has this 108 megapixels, and even if it's pixel binning, it is capturing a little bit more details. Also in the green grass, you can see it. And yeah, both punchy colors for the green grass, I think almost on par, but a bit more sharpening applied on the Redmi Note 10 Pro, but also a little bit more pixels to work with, a bit more details to work with on the Redmi Note 10 Pro. And you really have to pixel peep to see this, otherwise it looks like this, like almost the same. And yeah, I like that the Redmi Note 10 Pro can beat the iPhone SE here. When it comes to nighttime photography, this is a very dark situation. You can see, oh, the iPhone SE 2020, even without a dedicated night mode, is holding pretty much, yeah, very good here. The Redmi Note 10 Pro, however, it was not in night mode. It's a bit darker, it's a bit cooled down. Again, the iPhone SE is a bit more, I think a tiny little bit brighter, but also a bit more yellowish here. When we zoom in, we can see it is almost on par. There's a bit more noise going on the iPhone SE 2020, though it is adding a little bit more to the sharpness of the device. I have more noise, but it is still a bit sharper than the noise reduction that we see on the Redmi Note 10 Pro. You can still see a little bit of noise, but it's a little bit less sharp. Again, you can see the label a bit more yellowish and here a bit more cooled down. But the big difference comes when I go into the night mode here. And there you can see it is a tiny little brighter on the Redmi Note 10 Pro. It's a tiny bit more yellowish again also. I'm not sure why. But also it is clearer. And if I zoom in, you can then see, okay, the noise is gone and the sharpness is still there. So this is the advantage of the night mode. And the iPhone SE 2020 Apple should just add night mode for it, because it's a software feature and they can do it. Just take a look at the QR code, and here it's like a lot less busy and a lot less noisy. And yeah, get a tiny bit brighter shot in this shot here, which was surprising for me. But in this shot, a lot brighter shot, which is interesting because this one had a little bit more light to play with. And here the Redmi Note 10 Pro then in night mode uses this to create a lot brighter shot. But not only brighter shot, again, just take a look at here. A lot more noisy on the iPhone SE 2020, a lot more smoothened out on the Redmi Note 10 Pro. The night mode really kicks in and helps the Redmi Note 10 Pro when it comes to night photography. And the iPhone SE 2020 cannot compete in nighttime photography, especially when you turn on the Redmi Note 10 Pro's night mode on. So these are the photos. What do you think? Write it down in the comments. So let's do a zoom test on the Redmi Note 10 Pro. I'm on the ultra wide angle and recording 1080p 30. I can zoom in, of course. This is one time and this is 2 times. You can see it's not switching lenses. If I switch recording now 1080p 60 frames per second and start recording with the main lens, I can of course then zoom in a little bit further, and you can see this is now roughly 3 times. I have better quality. Let's go up to the sign as close as we can get. This is 6 times. This is how it looks like. It's a bit wobbly, but I think it's a better quality than what we saw from cropping in on the ultra wide angle. What do you think about this one? And now the iPhone SE, and yeah, I don't have a slider to slide in, but I can slide up here, and I think it is up to 6 times. Also zooming in here on this one, or yeah, maybe a little less, I don't know, but yeah, this is the maximum zoom in video mode that you can achieve on the iPhone SE. Which one is better in terms of zoom? And now this is recording with the internal microphone of the Redmi Note 10 Pro, 4K 30 frames per second, to show you that stabilization can be a little bit better on the Redmi Note 10 Pro as well. How's the audio quality here? Let's compare it with the iPhone SE. And now this is recording with the main back camera of the iPhone SE with the internal microphone, also 4K 30 frames per second, just to see if stabilization here is a little bit better than on the Redmi Note 10 Pro, or worse. You can decide for yourself. And also, how's the microphone here? Some people say that the older iPhones even have better mics than the newer iPhones. Is that really true? Write it down in the comment section. So which one of those is the clear winner in terms of photography and videography? I think there's only one clear winner when you take a look at the price list, and that's the Redmi Note 10 Pro. More flexibility thanks to triple lens setup, I would say, because the macro lens is really usable. At least you get like an ultra wide angle that can capture a little bit more. I think the main lens is good as well, and I also think in night mode really helps the Redmi Note 10 Pro to beat the iPhone SE. And of course videography, that's a very interesting one. I think here the iPhone still has better processing, but you have better flexibility with the Redmi Note 10 Pro. For some reason the Redmi Note 10 Pro is not as stable as the iPhone, but the footage is also pretty good. So all in all, if I have to give a win here, I would give it to the Redmi Note 10 Pro. The only good reason to get the iPhone SE and either the 2020 or 2022 version would be a small, compact and fast and long supported device, where the Redmi Note 10 Pro also got now Android 12 update, but yeah, it's a larger device. It's harder to handle. It has the better battery life, and in terms of cameras, I think it beats the iPhone in terms of flexibility, clearly. What is your opinion? Write it down in the comment section. That's everything for this video. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. Until the next time. Bye.